Hi there, my name is David Fawcett and I'm a PE teacher and learning innovator at Brookfield Community School in Southampton. You can find me on Twitter at DavidFawcett27 and I'm going to be going through some literacy and PE ideas for you today. Now this all came about a few months ago actually when we had a literacy inset at our school. Now we had a lot of good ideas that we took together and we collaborated with, and we brought it back to our department and started looking about how we could actually get it into the PE department in a really effective and manageable way. I then went on to Twitter and started sharing some ideas and asked a number of Twitter teachers if they'd like to collaborate and create some ideas as a group. As a group, we came back with over 50 ideas about how we could, in an easy and manageable way, get literacy embedded within PE and not have it as a bolt-on, but have it at the core of what we do in our lessons. If you want to have a look at the blog post, if you go to my Twitter tag and on the profile, click the link to my blog, Literacy and PE is on there. Now, what I'm going to do today is go through three different methods that we can look at. One is obviously how we can get literacy in your theory lessons. The second one is how we can get literacy in practical. And the last one is how we're going to get literacy as a department culture within your school. The first idea we're going to look at is what we call a fact in fiction task. It is a phenomenal way of getting students to produce an extended piece of writing which demonstrates a real solid understanding of the content that you've been teaching in your lesson, but in a very, very good way where students got to use a lot of literacy skills to develop a piece of work. What it really does well is, as I said, it takes a lot of facts and puts it into a fictional task, which allows you to really see and assess their knowledge of understanding. It also allows them to move from things like definitions all the way up to, if we're using things like Bloom's or Solo, up towards a deeper task as well at the top. What you do for a fact and fiction task is as follows. You pick your topic that you're going to be teaching. It could be physiology, it could be ICT and sport, it could be diet or gender, and you teach it. But as you go through it, you pick out specific terminology and keywords or definitions which are really core, essential words or, like I said, definitions for that particular topic. You then go away and you write yourself the opening of a story which you leave at a cliffhanger, and you share this with the students. This is an example of one that I did for a skeletal system task. It's called the revision nightmare, and a student is at home, it's the day before their PE exam, and they're just going to chill out the night before, maybe do a bit of revision, until they get a phone call from a student or a friend in their class called Dan. Now Dan in their class doesn't really listen, doesn't really do much, and he actually is phoning up you to say, any chance you could help me? I really don't understand the skeletal system, our test is tomorrow, it'd be really, really good if I can come round. You're a little bit hesitant to actually have that happen, and in the end, without you even knowing about it, Dan's knocking at your door. You open your door, and that's where the cliffhanger ends. You've got to then explain all of the skeletal system to Dan in a way that Dan's going to understand it, because obviously he hasn't understood it before, and that's where the students really got to demonstrate their knowledge and understanding to you. Now, as I said, you leave it at a cliffhanger, and then you put in the actual task underneath. Now, on here, it's telling the students that they've got to go away and carry on my story, either as a script or as a story which I've been writing out before. As they go through, they've got to explain it in the way that Dan will understand it. So now we've got to think about how we're going to word it for him. And second of all, as you go through, we've got to make sure that every time we include a fact or a keyword or a definition from GCSE PE from that particular topic, students need to understand it. And the way they do that is they're going to underline that particular keyword. Now, underneath that, we then have a list of these keywords and specific topics I want them to cover. So it says here they need to cover the functions of the skeleton, they need to explain the different types of bones, and also things like they need to talk about the skeleton and its role and the various types of movements that happens. Now, as you can see, students have obviously completed a piece of work for me. This one's actually a muscular piece of work for me, and they've carried on from the cliffhanger, and as I've said, they've gone through and they've underlined all the key words and the definitions and the specific terminology that I've asked them to throughout their text. This is really good for me because I can then quickly hone in on those key words and make sure that the references before or after them actually are the technical ones and actually demonstrate a really good understanding. And all the bits in between have really allowed me to assess that students understood in a deep way the particular topics that they're talking about in the fact and fiction task. Students add a lot of humour to these. Students write them in very different ways, so it also makes the marking of this a really good experience. It's not like you're answering exam questions, it's the same thing over and over again. You're really getting a chance for students to be creative and to shine and to really show you through their literacy skills that they can actually answer the content and the topic and include it with all the definitions, the answers and the deep understanding in a really interesting way. I would really encourage you to try out one of these literacy and PE tasks. And I've got 2 for physiology and a couple more for different topics. If you're interested, tweet me at davidfawcett27. I can share some with you. Another thing is called critique. This is probably the best thing I've done this year. It is a developed form of students giving feedback to each other and feed forward to each other, and it allows students to really develop a piece of work and make it better and better to obviously go away and produce a fine piece of work at the end. It focuses on process, it can focus on the literacy, it can focus on content, and it really is a fantastic way. If you really want a detailed explanation, the book on the left there by Ron Berger, An Ethic of Excellence, really talks about how his students in his class use critique as the core principle in their lessons, and the work they're producing is absolutely fantastic. Now, what I do, for whatever piece of work I'm getting students to do, particularly an extended piece of writing, I model that piece of work to my students. So for example, this year we used this as students were writing out a newspaper article based on science in sport, ICT in sport, role models, sponsorship and media, and they had to do a newspaper article based on that. So I got loads of newspaper articles and actually modelled what a good article looks like, and as a class we unpicked it. We pulled out the style that journalists write in. We pulled out key words and key elements and ways they include quotes and talk about different elements of those topics. We then from that created a success criteria which students would then refer to all the way through. Students then went off and created their first draft. Not their first piece of work, but their first draft, because I want students to get into the habit of thinking that what they were creating can be amended, it can be tweaked, it can be rewritten if needed to. It's not the finished article. Students then brought back to a timetabled time, so we had a calendar, and on a specific date we came back and we had a formal class critique, and students brought their first draft. In that lesson, I modelled how to critique with the student's piece of work. And I got it up on the board, I used a visualizer so the whole class could see his piece of work, and I broke it down and critiqued it and showed students exactly how to do it. They then, learning from this model, went and critiqued each other's work, and then off they went, gave them some feedback, gave them some feed forward, and specific things that they would do to make that piece of work better. Students then went off and redrafted and created their second draft, and then when we came back again for another timetable critique lesson, we redrafted that again through a critique. That process carries on over and over again until you get that final piece of work which students are proud of and they're happy of. Okay, and students actually got to the stage where they could critique their own piece of work, and were doing it in such a way that they were continuously amending and redrafting and getting an amazing piece of work at the end. Now there's 3 rules and 1 little protocol that we use within critique. The first one is be kind. Now all the comments which students give to each other's pieces of work must be focused purely on the work. It's there to help the work, and there's no personal comments, there's no sarcasm, there's no things like this piece of work is an epic fail, or you're an idiot for writing the way you did. There's no personal comments, it's just purely on the work. Second of all the comments need to be specific, so I actually banned unhelpful phrases and words like it's good, I liked it, this was bad. Okay, I banned those words because I want students to not waste each other's time. I want them to be able to give a very specific, detailed analysis and pick out, for example, in the second paragraph, the way you opened your sentence could have been better because, and actually have proper, detailed instructions to make that piece of work better. I also ask students to refer to the success criteria that we used at the very start when we modelled the very first article, so they can actually use the specific terminology there as well, or maybe just use specific terminology from that content or the topic or the scheme that we were working through. Last thing, students had to make sure that the work and the comments that were given was helpful. If it didn't help that piece of work, or if it didn't help the work of everybody in the class, we asked the students not to put that down. It needed to be something that was going to make that piece of work 1% better, 10% better, or 100 times better than what it was. And if what they were saying wasn't going to make that piece of work better, we asked them not to include it. The main ethos or the protocol is that we're hard on the content and we're soft on people. It's the work we're trying to improve, we're not trying to big up or put down the actual writer themselves. Now, as I said, there's a time that you actually have to do a formal class critique, and one version is where you do an in-depth critique. So I modelled how to do this to the students with a piece of work, and then I got them to go away and do it themselves. Now, I used a critique sheet on the right-hand side, which I made up, and I got students to focus on one element at a time. So I may have asked students to just focus on the first paragraph, read through it, tell me what you think, and everybody commented on everybody's first paragraphs. Then I may have said, right, now look at the second one, now look at the third one. Or I could have actually put a literacy element on there and said, well, actually look through and identify how well people have used quotes and how well they've referenced these quotes. So people go around and just look for that one particular thing. Or I could say, very simply, go through and check the spelling, the punctuation and the grammar. And when they critique it, they go through and check all the corrections and mistakes that need to be amended. And they really specifically say, in the first paragraph, third line, you use this instead of this. In the second paragraph, fourth line, you should have changed this for this, okay? And it's very, very detailed, specific feedback, so that student can take that away and make those amendments. The other way you can do it is called a gallery critique, and that's where you put up all the pieces of work that students have done, their first draft for instance, and then the class come in and you say, right, I want everybody to walk around, look at the walls, and I want you to read 3 bits of work in silence, and I want you to focus just on the opening paragraph and then write some specific feedback and feed forward on a post-it note and stick it underneath it. Very, very simple but very effective. When they've done that, you can say then, right, I want to now talk to somebody, explain what you talked about or notice about the piece of work, and then we're going to then look at another foci. So then I turn around and say, right, I want you to send them out all again, maybe look at the way they've used quotes. Talk about, is the article they've written, is it biased or unbiased, and give some feedback on that. And by doing this, students can go around, see lots of different pieces of work and stick up lots of bits of feedback as well, which then somebody can pull down, take away and redraft their bit of work and make it better. The next thing about in your theory lesson you could use is articles. Now I'm trying to step away from using just the normal textbooks as much as possible, and I'm trying to, when I'm doing a particular topic, use articles which A, reinforce the content, or B, give a very specific sporting example. And the authenticity of that really, really works well to students because they're actually using real life role models, real life situations, and they can draw that into their exams, into their exam answers, and really demonstrate they've got a solid understanding of the content that you're trying to teach them. Now, when we were doing our cycling project at Brookfield, we were looking, as I said, at role models, sponsorship, media, ICT and science and sport, and we were looking at technology and sport. Whilst we were doing this, I had a lot of articles which I brought to the class, and we read and we dissected and we pulled out the key content, the key topics, and we looked at how the sporting examples link. But then students actually went away and brought their own articles back to lessons which reinforced the stuff that we were learning. And I put a big list of them up on our Brookfield cycling blog spot. The URL address is in the top left hand corner there, and they were fantastic. They give that really authentic chance or examples for students to have that chance to break them down and put real examples in their exam questions, and it really, really reinforced the content. With these articles, you can do lots of different things as well. You can pull them apart, make a glossary. We can look for how the content I taught them in the lesson actually was in the articles. So again, a really good chance for you to analyse articles and pull out key things from them as well. The last idea I'm going to talk to you about is actually called IDEA. IDEA. It's very similar to what some people are using, which is PEED. Point, evidence, explain, describe, develop, and so on. Now, it's a writing frame. It's a way of answering long answer questions, and we use it for our students at Brookfield, especially with the AQA paper we do. They've got 2 8-mark questions in there, which really need students to be very focused with their answers and to not waffle, but pull out key points, key terminology, key content with using sporting examples and so on. So we use the IDEA framework. Now, as I said, it's a writing frame, and it stands for identify, describe, explain, apply, or analyse. Now, we use this writing frame for a particular question, which may be something like explain how a sports performer could use the principles of training whilst planning out their training regime for rugby. Now, students would obviously sit there and go, well, there's 5 principles of training: specificity, progression, overload, reversibility, or tedium. And what happened before, students literally just get all those 5 written down and just waffle on. This makes it more focused. And what we're asking students to do is pick one of those points at a time and talk through it in a really detailed way. Do it again for a second point, and maybe a third time for a third point, but maybe in less detail. So let's talk through an example of how that answer may look like. So, for the identify stage, they may just identify that specificity is one of the things they want to talk about in their exam answer. In the describe, which is step 2, what they need to do is give the textbook definition, how it's written in there, so they really show that they've learnt that topic, they know the exact definition that goes with specificity. In step 3, they then explain, and we ask the students in their own words to explain what specificity means, to show the examiner they really have a good understanding of the content. Not that they can just recite and remember facts, but actually can understand it and really describe in their own words what that means. And the last step then is they then need to apply it. And by that, they then apply it to a sporting situation, or especially in the AQA scenario questions, the big 8-mark questions, they actually have to apply it to a character who plays a particular type of sport. So here's an example here. So in the top box, specificity, they've identified it. In the describe box, they've given the definition. In the explain box, they've explained it in their own words, just using their own understanding. And then their apply one, they've linked it to the person in the exam question. And then this one, I've just made it up, a guy called Barry who's a weightlifter. Just made it up, so they've applied specificity to Barry and his situation. If you merge it all together, that's what their final answer reads like. And we get students to do it a second time, maybe for progression, and then just quickly touch base on one more just to show they've got 3 particular answers. Now the mark schemes in the AQA paper linked very closely to this, and it ended up getting a lot of our students full marks in this process. Really works very well. What I'm going to talk about now is some literacy ways in your practical lessons. Now the first one is we give lots of feedback, or get students to give lots of feedback in their lessons. Now what we try and do at Brookfield is teach students how to actually develop their feedback skills, and we trying to get them to develop the way they try and improve each other's skills through enhanced communication skills. We call it feedback with a purpose. Now we use these feedback sheets when we use our sports education activities. What it does is it tells students firstly what good feedback is and how to do it. Does the feedback you're going to give, is it going to improve a particular technique, a skill, a concept? Is it going to help them? We talk about the way they could give it, so can they give verbal feedback, can they give visual feedback? And then we actually try and get it more honed in and say maybe you should give 2 positives, 1 negative. We use it with students and we try and teach them that, and from then on we ask students to actually use this, this format when they're giving feedback, and hopefully the quality has improved. To ensure it has, we use 2 things. One is a learning spy, and that is, we may have some non-doers in the lesson who are injured or forgotten their kit, and we ask them to be the learning spy. We equip them with a clipboard and pen and paper, and they go around and they listen into the feedback that's been given from one person to another, and they write down good examples and bad examples. They go to the board, and with a board pen they write up these, and when I draw all the students back into the board, there's loads of quotes on there. The learning spy stands up and, without naming names, talks about the good examples of feedback and the bad examples of feedback, and then shares them with the class. Hopefully the class learns from this, they go off and give better feedback a second time round. I may choose somebody else to be the learning spy, and then they go out and listen in and snoop on each other's conversations and get good examples and bad examples. They do exactly the same, put it on the board, and then we may come back in again at the end of the lesson and say, look, these things were still happening. We talked about this, we said this needs to disappear, we said this isn't helpful, but it's still happening. And these spies can obviously again enhance the feedback that's been given in our lesson by giving real life examples of what's going on. You can also use what's called a feedback triad, and that's where you get them working in 3s. One person is giving the feedback, one person is receiving the feedback, and the other person is noting down what the feedback was. This works really well for 2 reasons. Number one, it really enhances the feedback that the person giving it says, because they know that it's going to be written down. So they've really got to think about, actually, am I saying this right? Because somebody's writing this down, and they need to make sure it's really, really good feedback I'm giving. Second of all, also helps the person receiving the feedback. So if you receive a lot of feedback, you may have missed some of the key points, you may have actually forgotten what some of the feedback was by the end of it. But actually having somebody writing it down, you can then refer to it and go, oh, I remember the first thing you said I had to go away and work on was, and they can then go away and work on it. Everyone swaps roles, and then hopefully they all get a different chance to give the feedback. The other thing you do, very simple, is when you're teaching a particular unit of work, is actually pull out the key words that you would like to develop, and maybe actually try and find alternative, more enhanced words that you could use, more difficult words, again, to establish a better vocabulary with the students you're working with. So we go to our schemes of work and we pull out the key words that we're going to be using in that particular topic, and then with our lesson objectives and our success criteria on the right hand side, we have our keywords up on the board, and we try and ask students A, to use them when they're giving feedback, B, to use them when I'm questioning them, but also I may want to quiz them and see whether they've actually understood what that word means. Okay, so I'm teaching them these key words, I'm enhancing their vocabulary, but at the same time I want them to use them within the lesson, so it's really reinforcing the way they're using them with their peers. The last thing I'm going to use is a way that you can actually develop PE literacy and make it the culture of your department and actually showcase it across the whole school. One thing we did at Brookfield a while ago, 2005, 2006, 2007, is we established a sports media team made up of an editor, a deputy editor, and a number of journalists and photographers that went out to different fixtures and reported on what was going on within our school. We then came back with these reports, we shared them with each other, the students talked about their stories, They wrote them out in their first draft. The editor, deputy editor, and their peers read over them. As an editor does, they made amendments to the work, provided suggestions, questioned some of the stuff they're putting in, and then the students went back, redrafted their work, and put forward this as a newspaper, which got distributed around school. Really, really good. You rotate this around as well to get new students each term to take on different roles. You enlist some new students to join part of the team, and it really showcases the PE and literacy idea that you're trying to get across the school. We had to stop it obviously because of money and the cutbacks, and it just cost a lot to get this out in print all the time, because we had about 15-20 pages each time. So another idea, which is from the Westville PE department, is actually turn this into a blog, which is pretty much cost free, and again it allows you to share results, fixtures, clubs, initiatives, maybe sports day results, things like that, and you can have your sports media team going around and actually share it on the blog. Attach the link to the blog on your school website or on your school's Twitter feed, and then tweet it out whenever there's a new article being written. One is going to obviously showcase the students' work, and B is again going to develop that literacy within your department and within the school, and actually show off your PE department as a real hub of literacy within your school. Hopefully these ideas are very helpful. There's about 40 or more ideas on my blog. Go to @DavidFawcett27, click on my profile, and go to the literacy and PE document there and have a little read through. If you have any questions, please feel free to tweet me, and I'd love to go through some ideas with you as well.